Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Elwood, and I want to welcome you to the Harvard Kennedy School, the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. This is a terrifically important and exciting event at a really critical time. And welcome to the 2015 Black Policy Conference here at the Kennedy School. This is the 11th anniversary of the conference, and the theme is Old to the Struggle, New to the Movement, Strategic Action for Fighting Racial Injustice. I'd like to acknowledge our very distinguished panelists here, and special thanks to the conference chair co-organizers. I think you have no idea how much time and energy it takes to put together something like this, and in order to make it easier and more helpful for them, we schedule exams and other things during the same time, so that way they can really learn from the experience. But I do want to thank co-chairs Samantha Jordan, Abdulaziz Saeed, and Maya Kane. So thank you all. Please. I cannot remember a time in recent history where the kind of energy and focus has been more intense on a set of issues around racial justice, obviously particularly around criminal justice issues, even the events of the last couple of days, once again reinforcing our fears. And so I am particularly thrilled that this conference is going on now and that we have a chance to host it. A number of people at this university and certainly in this school have been quite intensely engaged, not only in protesting, but in looking for answers and feeding into the President's Commission on Policing in the 21st Century. We've had many guest speakers here, but also panels and working groups and so forth at the school. But it's not enough, and it isn't only that issue. There are so many issues that both follow from and also precede those kinds of issues of justice and so forth. Much of my life has been devoted to studying of inequality, social policies, and the like. And this feels like an incredibly important time when you look and see not only what's happening, again, in the criminal justice realm, but on inequality, on schooling, on issue after issue. It's a time when I think we almost feel like we're on a knife edge where if we don't move soon, we may find ourselves in a place where it's very hard to move from. So thank you for taking the time on a Friday afternoon to be here, and for the weekend, I think it's really quite exciting and important. It is my job to introduce Karen Weaver, and that's a particularly joyous job for me. Karen Weaver here is our Senior Associate Dean for Degree Programs and Student Affairs at HKS, also just known as Dean of Students. I had the great fortune, astonishing fortune, to being able to hire her recently. She is a very distinguished, she previously had been involved in a small university based in Princeton, New Jersey. I don't remember the name of the university itself. But her role here is she oversees the staff of degree programs, student affairs, including admissions, student financial services, registrar's office, student services, career advancement, student diversity, inclusion, et cetera. And one of the striking things is, besides doing all those kinds of things to make this school work for people and try and build an inclusive place, she's also been deeply engaged in the issues, particularly the issues this year, and a whole variety of other kinds of things. It's not actually very surprising because that she's involved well outside the school as well, because she has a PhD in history from Columbia. And so she brings to the table both a great deal of wisdom and empathy and understanding. She was recently reappointed, for example, to serve a second term as National Series Editor for Teaching Religious Studies, produced by Oxford University Press, another little-known university elsewhere. And she was a Klug Scholar at Columbia. She received a Merit Fellowship and so forth and so on. We are enormously glad, and all of us are quite lucky to have with us Karen Weaver. Karen?
Thank you, Dean Elwood. Actually, I'm going to have you to come back up, Dean Elwood. I think the students have a surprise for you, so if you can just come on up. You want to come up on the stage? I think that would be great. Right there in the middle, if you don't mind, Dean Elwood. And I'm going to turn it over to Samantha.
Hi, everyone.
I don't like surprises.
Well, sorry about that. My name is Samantha Jordan, and I'm here with my co-chairs, Maya Kane and Abdulaziz Saeed. We're the co-chairs for the Black Policy Conference. This is actually our 11th year. We began in 2004, which incidentally was Dean Elwood's first year here at HKS. And we wanted to take some time out to thank him and recognize him for all the work he's done to create spaces like this to talk about difficult policy issues, especially those that impact communities of color. So we have this plaque. We wanted to thank you from the Black Policy Conference for exceptional commitment and dedication to HKS students.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. I take it back. I do like surprises.
All right, thank you so much. Let's give Dean Elwood and the students another round of applause. I have the distinct honor, pleasure, and privilege of introducing our panelists this afternoon, and I'm sure you, like me, are very excited and very much interested in getting to the conversation. So first, I'd like to start with the formal introductions. I think you know a lot about our panelists, but I'll tell you a little bit more about their background and what makes them so wonderful as artists. Ms. Chrisette Michele is a Grammy award-winning singer and songwriter, and she recently established her own label, Rich Hipster. She's a native of New York, and her father was a sociologist and her mother was a psychologist. In high school, she led gospel choirs, and she completed her undergraduate studies in vocal performance. Ms. Michele uplifts communities by creating a new lifestyle soundtrack that focuses on being rich in heart and art. While traveling the world, her mission is to build brand new nations built on the act of giving, peace, and unity. Along the way, she's had notable hip-hop collaborations with prominent artists such as Nas, and The Roots, and so many others. Her music has gone to #1 on the Billboard release, and in 2009, she won a Grammy Award for Best Urban Alternative Performance for the song Be Okay, featuring hip-hop singer will.i.am of the Black Eyed Peas. When she's not singing, she's supporting charities with her time. This ranges from serving food to displaced families, speaking at women's shelters, to visiting schools as a motivational speaker. Her heart and next project lies in opening homes for teenage boys. Ladies and gentlemen, Grammy Award winner, Chrisette Michele. Our next panelist, Clint Smith. Mr. Smith is a teacher, poet, and doctoral candidate in education here at Harvard University, with a concentration in culture, institutions, and society. He serves as a resident teaching artist in Boston Public Schools and as a writing instructor at Bay State Correctional Center in Norfolk, Massachusetts. Previously, he taught high school English in Prince George's County, Maryland, and served as a public health worker in Soweto, South Africa. His research interests include critical pedagogy, mass incarceration, the intersection of art and activism, how literacy shapes the formation of adolescent identity, and youth civic education. In 2013, Clint was named the Christine Sarbanes Teacher of the Year by the Maryland Humanities Council. He has spoken at the U.S. Department of Education and has been featured on TED.com. Additionally, he has been profiled in the book, American Teacher, Heroes in the Classroom. Clint is a 2014 National Poetry Slam champion, an individual World Poetry finalist, and has served as a cultural ambassador for the U.S. Department of State, conducting international workshops on cross-cultural understanding and youth empowerment. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Clint Smith. So I have the distinct honor of moderating our panel this afternoon. I have a series of questions that we've prepared for our panelists, and then at about 4:30, 4:45 or so, we're going to open it up for you to ask questions to our panelists. So I'd like to get started. I think it's important to start our conversation this afternoon by really explicating our conference theme, which is old to the struggle, new to the movement. And I think it's so important to acknowledge pioneers from the Harlem Renaissance and the Black arts movement and the embedded social justice tradition of many Black artists from the 19th and 20th centuries. do each of you see yourselves as an extension of that movement and tradition? And if so, how?
Sure. In so many ways, I'm so grateful for those who came before us and paved the way. I think about things like having an agent, and having an agent who's over 60 or almost 70 years old, who has booked the talents of those who still had to maybe walk in the side or not be able to hang out with everybody else. I mean, at the end of the day, the people who taught him might be the people who didn't respect or receive me. So the way that the women who came before me carried themselves, the way that they treated others, is really, really important. And I think it attributes to just how your character, your demeanor, and what you give them paves the way for us, if that makes any sense.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. When I think about it, I think of how, I almost go back to the founding of this country and how black people were brought to the United States and never with the intention of being able to read, write, or create. And I keep coming back to this text I read from Thomas Jefferson, Notes on the State of Virginia, which is his memoir. And in it, he says explicitly that black people are inherently inferior to white people. He says that the slave is incapable of possessing and sustaining complex emotion, complex thought. The slave is incapable of love. And so what does that mean? You know, for the intellectual founding father of this country, the person who was largely responsible for the conception of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, to have not thought that I was fully human, that we were fully human, to not think that I could love my family, that I could have passion, that I could love art, that I could create art. And so when I think about what it means to be specifically a black artist now, I think we come from a tradition of people who have resisted that since we came here, who have resisted this idea that we weren't meant to make beautiful things, and weren't meant to create things that spoke to the specificity and sort of idiosyncrasies of our lives. And so I've been wrestling a lot myself this year with what it means to create political art. And, you know, and that doesn't, in political art, you know, I think when I first started doing poetry, I thought it meant that every poem had to be indignant. I thought it meant that it had to be about the man, boo white supremacy. I thought it had to be that sort of thing. But in thinking about that, I realized that, you know, to come from an ancestry and the tradition of people who weren't meant to create and to create at all is in and of itself like a political act, and in and of itself is an act of revolution, right? And pushing back against this thing we were never meant to do. And so whether you're writing about Ferguson or whether you're writing about a flower, those things in and of themselves represent something really powerful and something that you know, speaks to what we've decided to do in the face of a history that's been very violent towards us.
Absolutely. And as Dean Elwood said, particularly with my background as a historian, I'm ever mindful of history and the arts and the intersection, and just how much courage and vision it takes to be an artist, and how it really challenges the very historical concepts of people of African descent not being fully human. So thank you both for those. Oh, sure.
Make another point, because I love what you said about it. It may not necessarily be a specific lyric. At the end of the day, too, there are so many ways to support our community by where we showcase our art, you know? And so you might have your flower in a black-owned gallery and create traffic there. You might hire perhaps a black promoter to promote your shows. I know agencies, huge agencies, and there are only really 4 of them in America that will not take phone calls from us. And so when we take our own phone calls from each other, when we support our own businesses, sometimes that's making a statement and saying, this Grammy Award-winning artist is performing here tonight, and this is who hired her, this is who brought the chairs to the venue, and this is who was the cleanup crew. And when we stand up for each other, I think we make a statement and say, we are just as great as.
So it's artistic, but it's also economic, political, and social as well.
Absolutely.
And I want to keep going with this theme. On one hand, music, poetry, and the visual arts have an aesthetic value. There's beauty. There's something that you appreciate about what's created. But on another level, there is the power of the message that is conveyed in the piece or in the artistic rendering. And I want to know, how do you see yourselves fitting within this larger trajectory of conscious artists? And who are some of the artists who have influenced you?
Queen Latifah is somebody who I think is just, UNITY was the big record. I mean, we all sat around in our living rooms with leggings on and big top hats like she had on and sang UNITY. And that was a moment because she was in the midst of so many other things going on, and to sing a song about unity. So she was somebody who definitely influenced me. Do I think that I make a similar contribution? I'm thinking about Queen Latifah today, and the movies that she's on today, like Hairspray, the places that you find her on HBO now, she's coming out with. So for me, it's really about where she puts herself, where she allows herself to be seen. That says a lot about how valuable she thinks her art is, and who she thinks should see it, who she thinks should pay for it.
Interesting, yes.
Yeah, I always come back to James Baldwin. I mean, Baldwin is in many ways kind of like, if I have any sort of problem in life, like if, I'm struggling with issues of systemic oppression, or if my tooth hurts, I'm like, I just need to read some James Baldwin. Everything will be okay. Jimmy will tell me what to do. No, but I just think he wrote so prolifically in such a remarkable way. And the fact that he wasn't traditionally educated. And a lot of what this year has been for me, and you mentioned in my biography, I've been working at a correctional center in Norfolk, Massachusetts. A lot of what the reading of James Baldwin and then working at that center have been this sort of decoupling of what it means to be well-schooled as compared to well-educated, right? And we sit in this place that represents something very powerful, sort of the intellectual bastion of this country and maybe the world. But I think it's so important for us and for myself to remind myself that there exists an entire world of folks beyond this institution and beyond the academy who bring a rich sort of like intellectual, conscious, political disposition to a lot of these issues we're talking about. I was recently thinking about the word conscious is interesting because I think it denotes a sort of like intentionality. And I was thinking about, to your point, this idea of artists having access or not having access to certain spaces. And so in my context, I'm thinking about the literary world. And I'm thinking about growing up and how few authors there were who looked like me, or how few authors there were who talked about my life as I experienced it. And so for me, I was really disillusioned with reading and school as a kid until I came across Walter Dean Myers and his work. And for folks who aren't familiar, Walter Dean Myers is like an incredible African-American young adult fiction writer, and just wrote series and series of books about, with young black male protagonists. And it was really the first time that I had the opportunity to like see myself in books and see myself and kids who looked like me living on the page, and that was powerful. And so would Walter Dean Myers consider himself a conscious writer? I don't know, but I think he wrote purposefully, and I think he wrote for a group of young people who had largely been left out of the literary canon. And for me, that's I try to take a similar approach. I don't know if I consider myself conscious as much as I just try to be honest.
You want to add anything?
No, the conscious versus honest, I won't go there, but I really, I'm going to ponder on that one. Yeah, because do they go hand in hand? Are you doing your duty if you're not both? I mean, when those two things have to verse each other, then how much of either are we being? And it's such a tough call because you're an artist. First of all, you don't want to offend anybody.
Certainly.
You want to be able to speak to everyone, and then two, you want to get something off of your chest that really means something to you.
So the consciousness artistic, there's really kind of a fluidity, right?
There's got to be, and that's almost the art of being an artist, yeah?
Certainly, and I think that, I guess sometimes I worry that with the term conscious, it can become sort of restraining, in that it limits one's ability to speak to like the totality of an experience, right? That. So when Talib Kweli or Common or Mos Def, who are rappers that I looked up to growing up and like very much, they saved my life in many ways. Whenever they were labeled the conscious rappers. And so whenever they talked about something that wasn't injustice, just directly, everybody was very disillusioned, and they were like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe Common is talking about like, you know, going to a party. That's crazy. Like, what? But it's like, no, he's a person, you know, and like he wants to have a good time, and like, and he wants to like fight oppression and turn up, like, and that's okay. And so I think I say honest because I want folks who are honest about like their whole experience and their whole life.
I love that point. I love that.
That's great. Well, I want to transition to something a little more serious, only because I was thinking about how the students earlier acknowledged Dean Elwood and his tenure here as a dean. And one of the things he did earlier this year was to host a town hall meeting that he and I co-moderated in order to have a community-wide conversation about what happened in Ferguson with Michael Brown and Staten Island with Eric Garner. And many of you may also be aware of the recent killing of Walter Scott in South Carolina. And I just wanted to know, what are your personal reactions to what happened? And do you think artists have a responsibility to address big issues like this? And the second part goes back to one of the points that you raised earlier about how do you create an inclusive conversation or dialogue and not alienate some of your fans?
So I'm really interested in that latter point. So I recently had the incredible opportunity to present at the TED conference in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I remember I got the email, and they were like, Clint, we would love for you to come perform at TED, and we're hoping that it can be something positive and uplifting. And I was like, okay. And this was right after Tamir Rice had been killed. So that was on my heart and mind a lot. And so, you know, I was in sort of an emotional space, and I responded, and I was like, hello, thank you so much for the opportunity. I plan on talking about how white parents have to how black parents have to raise their children in categorically different ways than white parents just to keep them alive. Thanks. And then I didn't hear back from them for like 3 weeks, and I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm not speaking at TED anymore. But then they responded, and they were like, well, we hope it can end with hope and resilience. I was like, all right, middle ground. But when I knew I was going to this place that represented almost like a different stratosphere of like power and wealth. I mean, it's a crazy place. Like Al Gore is like chilling at the salad bar. Bill Gates is walking around in an Ebola suit. It's like a very bizarre, remarkable place. But I wanted to make sure that I was bringing work that was going to push that audience in a way that I wasn't sure they otherwise would be. And so a lot of what I thought about and continue to think about is how can I create work that is unsettling, because so many of these are unsettling issues, without making it so uncomfortable that people tune out. Because I think so often what happens, especially in the progressive community, is that folks can make people feel like personally implicated. And that's not to say people shouldn't, because a lot of times folks are complicit in what's happening around them. But I think if somebody feels like you're calling them a racist before you ever have the opportunity to like meaningfully engage them, I don't think that's productive at all. And so a lot of that, I think, comes from speaking from a specific vantage point, right? And so when I went, I did a piece that spoke about what it was like growing up in a world where like my parents had to make decisions between whether or not to let me be like a child in all of that represents, as compared to like trying to keep me safe and keep me alive.
Yeah. I understand that I'm some people's voice, and was always comfortable saying that. But if someone keeps telling you something, just get over it and deal with it. Essentially, I'll come out with an album, and it'll be an album where it was scientifically created to be played on the radio. And it will be played on the radio, and there will be a top 10 song on there, and people may or may not purchase it, but usually they will. Then I come out with an album called Let Freedom Reign, and I quote a lyric that goes, I'm not Afro-American, I'm just black in America, just a passive American making believe I'm better than what we've been. And I get deep, and I say what I really wanted to say on the first one, and not as many people buy that record, right? But maybe half as many. And then I come back out with another one where it's scientifically created to be played on the radio. And having that balance of art is kind of what makes me feel like I'm being honest and conscious, because it is an exhausting endeavor to not be both. I mean, at the end of the day, some days you want to sing about love, some days you really, really, really want to light the fire underneath somebody's tuchus and tell them what you really think about society, but you don't want to say goodbye to everybody by doing so. And so it is a tough call, but I think you go back and forth a little bit.
And one of the things that I wanted you both to address, most of the people here in the audience, or many of the people here in the audience are tuning in, are students. Mm-hmm. What advice do you have for aspiring artists who are trying to make a change in society, but who are also trying to make a living, whether it's paying for groceries or paying for graduate school or a place to live just to sustain themselves? What advice do you have for them?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. Marketing is one of my favorite subjects, right? Because we have this thing called social media where there's everything from Meerkat to Facebook to Snapchat to Twitter to Instagram, etc. So we're talking about budgets and we're looking for free marketing. You're trying to have a voice in society and you want to say something that's meaningful, but you don't know if it'll pay the bills, right? Dress it up a little bit. Put a nice graphic on it. People are attracted to what looks nice. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to get somebody by putting your hair up in a ponytail and slapping on some red lipstick, putting it on Instagram, and then having the quote of the day underneath that's really touching. It's really, really hard, again, to balance those two things, but we have social media, which makes things a little less expensive, and then mixing up the visual to attract and then the conscious to educate.
Yeah, no, I think that point's really well founded. I think social media has very much democratized who can create art and who has access to art. And we don't have to go through these traditional large corporations and entities to disseminate our message. Like for me, all of, I have no agency or anything like that. I just put some videos on YouTube and, I was fortunate enough that things kind of happened from there. So I think being purposeful, I think, establishing partnerships with people who can disseminate your message, whatever it may be, in the best possible way. But I think even before that, I taught high school English for several years, and so I had a lot of kids who wanted to be, singers or rappers or dancers, and I think want them to have those dreams, right? I think that's important. But sometimes I feel like folks get more caught up in the hustle to disseminate their message than the hustle of trying to refine their craft, right? And like, you want to be the best writer or the best poet or the best singer or the best dancer you can be, so that once you are in, once you have been disseminated, you have something really powerful and really different and really unique to you to bring. So I think, making sure that you focus on the art before you focus on how the art is going to be conveyed to the world.
Absolutely. So I have one more burning question, and this is before we open the floor up to questions. I think many of your fans would like to know this question as well. What would you describe as some of the most powerful and or prolific words or lyrics from your body of work? And would you be willing to share that with our audience this evening?
Oh, man.
I think they're asking you to sing.
Sorry?
I think they're asking you to sing.
No, I don't think that's what she's saying. Is that what?
Or you can say it, whatever you feel led to do.
Unfortunately, I was rapping this part.
Okay,
that's okay.
But very unfortunate.
We'll take that, right? We'll take that. Yes. Okay.
Everybody loves rap.
But if I could give a tiny explanation, I was so uncomfortable with singing love songs and breakup songs, and I just felt like I had so much to say, and I was disappointed with a lot of things that were going on in our community. And I told my mom, I said, Mom, I'm gonna put out one of those, change the world kind of records. Let's see what happens. And the record label said, well, this is going to be called an art piece. I said, all right. They said, it's not gonna be commercial. I said, well, that's fine. I'll deal with that. I didn't realize how many people would requote this lyric, but it is, I'm not Afro-American, I'm just black in America, just a passive American, making believe I'm better than what we've been. And at the end of the day, it is about, can I get my self-esteem to meet what they are telling me freedom is? You know, can I get my self-esteem to meet what they're telling me I have so that I can let go of the titles that I've been given and create from a space of peace with who I am and freedom. And that's a tough thing to do when you know where you came from, and it kind of lives with you on a daily basis. So, you know, we always, in the hip-hop community, well, what's Afro-American? You know, what exactly is that? And there's all these incredible definitions. But really, I think maybe I might be an American with brown skin. And that's uncomfortable to say in front of people, but it's what I thought. So that was the lyric.
Yay, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to actually do a part of a poem from what I did for my TED Talk. I'll do it sitting, feel like my grandpa. One night when I was 12 years old, on an overnight field trip to another city, my friends and I bought super soakers and turned the hotel parking lot into our own water-filled battle zone. We hid behind cars, running through the darkness that lay between the streetlights. Boundless laughter ubiquitous across the pavement. But within 10 minutes, my father came outside, grabbed me by my forearm, and led me into our room with an unfamiliar grip. Before I could say anything, tell him how foolish he had made me look in front of my friends, he derided me for being so naive. Looked me in the eye, fear consuming his face, and said, "Son, I'm sorry, but you can't act the same as your white friends. You can't pretend to shoot guns. You can't run around in the dark. You can't hide behind anything other than your own teeth." I know now how scared he must have been, how easily I could have fallen into the empty of the night, that some man would mistake this water for a good reason to wash all of this away. These are the sorts of messages I've been inundated with my entire life. Always keep your hands where they can see them. Don't move too quickly. Take off your hood when the sun goes down. My parents raised me and my siblings in an armor of advice, an ocean of alarm bells so someone wouldn't steal the breath from our lungs, so that they wouldn't make a memory of this skin, so that we could be kids, not casket or concrete. And it's not because they thought it would make us better than anyone else. It's simply because they wanted to keep us alive. All of my black friends were raised with the same message. The talk given to us when we became old enough to be mistaken for a nail ready to be hammered to the ground, when people made our melanin synonymous with something to be feared. But what does it do to a child to grow up knowing that you cannot simply be a child, that the whims of adolescence are too dangerous for your breath, that you cannot simply be curious, that you were not afforded the luxury of making a mistake, that someone's implicit bias might be the reason you don't wake up in the morning. But this cannot be what defines us. Because we had parents who raised us to understand that our bodies weren't meant for the backside of a bullet, but for flying kites and jumping rope and laughing until our stomachs burst. We had teachers who taught us how to raise our hands in class and not just to signal surrender, and that the only thing we should give up is the idea that we aren't worthy of this world. So when we say that Black lives matter, it's not because others don't. It's simply because we must affirm that we are worthy of existing without fear when there are so many things that tell us we are not. I want to live in a world where my son will not be presumed guilty the moment he is born, where a toy in his hand isn't mistaken for anything other than a toy. And I refuse to accept that we can't build this world into something new, someplace where a child's name doesn't have to be written on a t-shirt or a tombstone, where the value of someone's life isn't determined by anything other than the fact that they had lungs, a place where every single one of us can breathe.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both so much. And now we're ready to hear questions from you. And I'd like to invite you to come. We have 4 microphones, 2 here on the lower level and 2 in the balcony. All questioners, we just ask for you to identify yourself. And remember, a question, no speeches. And if you can end your question with a question mark, that would be great. So if you could come now and present your questions to our illustrious panelists. Okay, we're going to start right here. If you could say your name.
Hi, my name is Genesis Fonseca, and I'm a first-year PhD candidate in American Studies. My question is actually for you, Clint. I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit more about the Black Poets Speak Out movement online. I think it's important for people in this audience to know about that.
Yeah, no, thank you. So the phenomenon that Genesis is referencing, Black Poets Speak Out, was started by a group of Black poets from the Cave Canem Collective, which is this Black artist retreat based out of University of Pittsburgh. And they came together after Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, and a lot of these killings and non-indictments, and came together and say, what is the Black artist's responsibility, and specifically the Black poet's responsibility in this space? And they kind of created a database for all of us to come together and put up these YouTube videos that were poems specifically delineating the sort of nuances and idiosyncrasies of Black life as it relates to state-sanctioned violence, and even beyond state-sanctioned violence, because a part of the point of that movement was to ensure that we weren't being defined by these things that were destroying us or that were trying to destroy us, and that what Black life represents is so much more than this perpetual inundation of violence that we're subjected to and that we see. And something that I've been thinking a lot about, because, you know, with the man who was killed in South Carolina, Walter Scott, you know, for 24 hours, my Facebook feed was all videos of this Black man being shot. And I'm thinking, like, what sort of trauma does that exact on people to perpetually watch Black people being killed on an ongoing, ever-present basis? And certainly it's important because it brings forth attention and critical awareness in a way that maybe didn't exist before. Not that these killings didn't exist before, because they did. Now that cell phones are more ubiquitous, people can catch them or capture them rather. But and I think the Black Poets Speak Out is similar in that, like, we have this opportunity and we have this opportunity to use art to push back against that being the sort of the singular image of what Blackness is, and showing that Black people, again, like, can create in the face of a violent history and a violent reality that we kind of live in right now.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, you guys can find it on Facebook, just hashtag Black Poets Speak Out. And it's a really beautiful space of empowerment, pain and empowerment, but also just consciousness.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clint.
Thank you. Our next question right here on our right.
Oh, my bad. I was getting too much into my shirt. My name is Jamarcus, and so I'm from Arkansas, and I went to college in California, and now I'm working here. And I noticed that the Black experience in the United States is similar, but there's like subtle idiosyncrasies relative to what geographic region that you're in. And so my question is kind of along the lines of, when you're formulating whatever type of lyrics or any type of thoughts that you're going to express, how do you try to make sure that they're representative of the experiences that all people, all Black people in the U.S. face, but also that they're also make sure that it's not too general to where they can just be applied to anyone. So I'm just trying to make sure that you can speak to everyone at the same time, but also make sure you're hitting people relative to what they actually experience and relative to what they live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, being politically correct is not my forte, and I don't try to make it my forte. Sometimes I'll say one thing in Detroit, Michigan, that I won't say in Connecticut. And I might say something in New Orleans that I might not say in Los Angeles, California. I might even create something on Instagram or whatever a social media platform, and only say it when I visit that city and title it to that city. I might only put a song on certain radio stations in certain cities. So I am pretty conscious of who I'm speaking to, and I'm okay with, you know, veering on the line of perhaps somebody in Los Angeles hearing something I said in San Francisco.
Right. Yeah, I think I'm like very clear that I don't speak for the whole Black experience, right. And I never try to write in a way that is like, this is what all Black people think. Right? I've been in enough classrooms when where I was like the Black voice. You know, we're reading Toni Morrison. The Black perspective. Yeah. We're reading Toni Morrison, and people lean over like, Clint, what does Toni mean here? Or like, what do the Black people think? And I was just like, So, we're not a homogenous community, as you alluded to. Like, we are a very diverse group of folks within this demographic. And it would be disingenuous and problematic if I were to try and write from a perspective that wasn't my own, right? And so, and again, that's part of being honest, right? And like, I'm honest about my own positionality. I recognize that like my Black experience is different than your Black experience, and different than everyone in this. All of our experiences are unique and different, but I think there's sort of underlying thematic, underpinnings that exist across the experience. And even if someone does, so when I did that poem at the TED conference, there were very few black people at TED, but there were people who came up to me afterwards and said, I never realized it was like that. Like, I can't imagine having that conversation with my son. I'm so sorry. And for me, that it's because I spoke from my own life, right? I didn't try to say, like, this is what all Black people experience. I said, this is something my dad had to tell me, like, every day growing up, and that is my reality. And if it's someone else's reality, that's great, but it's important for you to understand that I'm only speaking for myself, and it may be reflective of a larger phenomenon, but that's not for me to decide.
Great, thank you. Yes, right here.
Thank you. This is wonderful. My name is Craig Kelly. I'm a mid-career here. And I think that a lot of us have both to learn stuff and to unlearn stuff we think we know. And how do you, as artists, combine the teaching of new things and helping people unlearn the stuff that they learned long ago that they would like to jettison but have difficulty doing?
Thank you. That's a great question.
I love to make sure that, I'm sorry, but marketing, it's, again, making sure that young people are in the same room with old people in a non-intimidating environment, kind of like this room. This is an incredible space where people... But yeah, I think it's about just making sure that you can be that way, that we can let our hair down and love on each other in a non-intimidating environment, and then open up the discussion where it doesn't feel threatening.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great question. I think it's something that, we've obviously been wrestling with here. You all have been wrestling with it at the Kennedy School. We've been wrestling with it at the Ed School. Like, how do you create spaces for people to engage in these conversations, being cognizant of biases and preconceived notions and prejudices that people are bringing to that space. And it's hard, right? It's hard because I'm a deep believer that it's never the responsibility of an oppressed group of people to convince the oppressor, so to speak, that they are human, right? Or that they are worthy of existing in just a normal human way. I don't think it's the responsibility of queer people to do that. I don't think it's the responsibility of Black people, of immigrants, of poor people. With that said, I think that someone from that group can make a decision as to whether or not they want to engage. It's not, and I think the specific thing is about around the world responsibility. So while it's not someone's responsibility, I think that someone can make a decision that, like, I want to engage this person who is different from me, who may have views that I deem as problematic, but I'm going to meet them where they are, and we are going to engage in a dialogue and conversation moving forward from there. But I think it's important for those who are coming from the majority never to impose that responsibility on someone else, instead to have that be offered to them, instead of saying, like, oh, well, I don't understand this, tell me. Waiting for that person to say, like, this is something, because that's a traumatic thing, right? To have to, like, delineate your entire life of trauma and violence, and that's exacted on you in both a macro and micro way. And that's a decision that someone has to make, I think, very much for themselves.
Thank you. Our last question. Yes, right here.
Sorry. Wow, I'm so lucky. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Joelle. I'm a first-year MPP student here. And my question, I think, follows quite well with the other one. I guess going beyond creating spaces to talk about these issues, I wanted to ask, what has been your experience as an artist taking your art from personal expression to the point where it is actively involved in inciting a movement or joining a movement or getting people to change their behavior? And I ask this in the context of those of us who are interested in art, who want to use it as a tool, but right now it's stuck in that place of just personal expression.
I mean, there's so many different kinds of platforms again, and we live in a world where, I mean, freedom in that way is awarded us greatly, from social media to schools. I mean, there are so many places to begin expression. I've been having a lot of fun with something called the Pose and Post Symposium. And it might sound, you know, fun and silly, but essentially it's a group of girls who decided, let's get each other together in a room and share how we, you know, create our art and how we market it and put it out there for the world to see. You can start your own little groups, you can start your own things. And we live in a world where word of mouth and social media spread really quickly, but it's really about joining forces with the artists next to you and saying, come on, let's do this together. And that's what makes it fun, and that's what makes it spread.
Does that mean you're gonna put me on the track?
I would love to. And
I think that's what I heard. You know, so
and that's the reason why I choose my features so carefully. Yeah. That's the reason why I have a feature with Rick Ross and Talib Kweli.
And Clint Smith.
Do you know what I mean? I'm down. Absolutely. That's how we do it.
Yeah.
That's how we do it.
What can I say? You both have been fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, Chrisette Michele, Clint Smith, please join me in thanking them. You all stand, take your bow.